Hey, everybody, and welcome to Safer Journeys, a podcast. I am your host, Grace McCormick, and our very special guest today is Tonjie Reese from 1124. How are you doing today, Tonjie?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm very excited you're here. I got the privilege of hearing you speak in Washington, D.C. at the NNEDV conference, excuse me. And I'm looking forward to kind of hearing more about what you guys do. So you are the founder of an organization called 1124. What is it? What is it? What was the motivation? I wish I could talk today. Behind founding it, working. What's the kind of work that you do?
So 1124 was founded because I noticed a gap in a need in creating prevention programming that would be relevant for young people of color. At the time, I was doing prevention education work, didn't necessarily have a home base to do that work, but I always had all of these ideas because that was the work that I had been doing is education with young people and organizing with young people. So 1124 was sparked. Actually, the idea came from my master's program. So I was in a grant writing class while I was getting my master's, and we had to write a mock grant, and we had to make up some type of like nonprofit, or we could use a one that existed. So I decided to just create something called Project 1124. And so when the time came for me to make some career changes, I was like, maybe I can just see if this is a possibility. And so that's really how I got the start. I started off going to conferences similar to where we met at the Tech Summit, just sharing information and knowledge, talking about intersectional approaches to prevention education, not just solely focusing on like this is what unhealthy relationships look like, and that's it. But actually looking at identity as a part of the way that we provide prevention education work.
And then where is 1124 based? Do you work primarily in one area, or are you kind of nationwide in terms of what you do?
So we started off completely remote, but now we actually have an office in Detroit. So that's my home base. We recently opened an office, as in like this summer, opened up the office. But we do work all across the country.
Awesome. I did a little research on your website because I was curious about what kind of media literacy services you offered. I noticed that you support both adults and young people, which I think is maybe not as common as we'd like it to be. What are some of the differences in the way that you both interact and, you teach them? What are some of the similarities too? Like, how does that compare with the different demographics?
Yeah, so first, I think sometimes as adults, we assume that young people just are unaware and we have to kind of start from scratch with them. But we know that young people are constantly getting information from other people, they're learning about things. So I like to meet folks where they are. And on the opposite end, sometimes we assume that adults, have all the answers or are understanding. And a lot of times adultism will come up. And I learned that a lot of the things that they thought they knew about young people really isn't true. So, in the ways that I teach is honestly the same. Some of same workshops that we have that are for young people, we do those same things for adults. And just, change things and create it from a different framework. So the adults we mostly work with are other prevention educators, advocates, so folks who work in the movement.
Okay,
But
awesome.
at the same time, we have to constantly be learning, So even though the approach is that it's building their capacity up, it's also an opportunity for them to really engage as participants to figure out how, a young person might receive whatever it is that we're talking about that day.
And then that's really interesting because I think a lot of people focus a lot on, oh, well, they're younger, they have to learn differently, or they're older, they may not know as much. So I value that you're kind of making a uniform curriculum because I think it's something that everybody needs and everybody needs the same amount, right? Because
Hmm.
I've seen a recent uptick in concern about a lack of media literacy being taught or even, recognized kind of as social media has taken off, maybe our literacy has declined. How do you navigate a changing world in terms of technology and specifically, I think AI is a big one, as people are given more options to allow something or someone else to think for them?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the thought sometimes is, well, the truth is, I'll start there, is that technology a lot of times moves faster than we can keep up with. And so I don't know if any of us will ever fully grasp everything in real time. I think, especially in the DVSA world, we really have to be mindful of what trends are happening. But I think sometimes we have to give ourselves grace and not think that we have to know every single thing, like every single app is or how every single piece of technology operates. That's where young people, I feel like, become our best teachers because a lot of times young people are up to date on those trends. And I'm a person who was also anti-AI, but I also am pro at the same time because I think when we consider things like identity and we consider who is behind the coding, I think we have to lean into it so that we empower folks who come from marginalized communities to be a part of that process and be a part of the folks who are creating this technology. So I think it's the end in both. We can recognize that this is a computer, this is based off of coding, this is based off of what someone else thinks, usually a white male is thinking about what this topic is. But then we can also empower and reach out and look at folks who are from marginalized communities who are also creating these same technologies. And recognize too when something is fake, is a deep fake, and when something is not, when something is coming from a person and when something is not real. And I think it requires a level of research, which can be a fun thing to do, but with media literacy, I also look at it as an opportunity, not just to analyze it or evaluate it, but also to create and act. So I think giving young people the power to use things like AI to create new things is empowering. And that's the way that we can teach because media literacy is not, again, just about how we analyze it, but how we also creating new media too.
And then maybe we take a step back for maybe people who don't know what literacy is. Why is it so important? What are we going to miss out on if we lose it?
Yeah. So media literacy is the opportunity to create, to analyze, to evaluate, to act, and to understand media or how we access media. So the first part of like that, if we start with even accessing media, we have to remember that everyone does not have access to the same type of media. If you go into, say, for example, a rural community, it's going to be different from more urban settings. The kind of media, even from like TV and the news, it's going to be different. The kind of advertisements that happen, they're going to be different. And so, not even just that, understanding that having access to technology is not the same for everyone. There is a big digital divide where folks who come from lower income areas don't always have the same access to even things like Wi-Fi. And so if you don't even have access to get connected to like internet, you won't be able to have the same opportunities as folks who have it readily available. And we saw that during the pandemic. We saw in communities upwards of 60% of people in some communities didn't have access to high-speed internet in their homes. They had to go out places. We saw pictures of young people in parking lots, like doing their homework. And so that's one part of it is how we access it. Another part of it is how we evaluate it. And that really is who is creating the media that we're consuming. So sometimes we'll see I know I come across a lot of times like social media pages, and they will be full of stereotypes. And for me, it's an automatic alarm of like, who made this? But not even just that, even if we look at who owns like major communications, who owns technology companies, overwhelmingly, it doesn't come from the global majority. It's most of the time folks who are not in marginalized communities. And but the other part of that is these companies are speaking for people and speaking on people's behalf. And so that's another reason why media literacy is important is to look at who is creating the media. And that's how we get into analyzing it. So that's when we start to poke holes in it to see what the real message is. Like we can be given a narrative about something, but what is the real story behind it? What is the true narrative? And the other parts that I mentioned too is acting. So knowing that we have the power to create new media. that we don't have to rely on it. And we're constantly creating media. Every time someone posts on social media, every time someone sends a text message, records a video, write a blog, these are all forms of media. So it doesn't have to be like on TV and the news. It can be any kind of way media is being produced. But the other part of it is we could do that from a space of equity, of diversity, inclusion, and liberation. It doesn't have to be a part of that dominant narrative that we're used to. Another part of it is ACT, which I also love. It's like calling out media that's harmful or recognizing. That's like fact checking. Like when we're seeing like, or sometimes like it was these like trends with AI where people are creating these pictures like these siblings are 90 years old. And you can tell if you just look closely at the picture, it's not real. But they float around and people will they'll get hundreds of thousands of shares on these images that are not true. And that's like a light example. But when we get into things like domestic and sexual violence, specifically think about sexual violence, it's more harmful when someone is creating an image that is not true. And so that's where the action comes in of offering this information, especially to young people, but also to adults who may not be up to date on these trends or aware that these things are happening. And like I said, it's constantly changing. And the best thing that we can do is be collaborative with young people, but also be collaborative and understand like who is creating these things, especially and also learning how to create them too.
And I know that you teach workshops kind of across the country, right? You teach people how to identify all the things that you've been talking about, which I think is a really valuable skill. Have you like have you seen anything? Have you heard any stories of the things you teach about media literacy making a noticeable difference?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, some of the media, so we always include media literacy in our healthy relationship workshops, especially with young people. We try to use clips from like TV shows or movies, or we even ask like for songs. Like sometimes I'll start off a session, like what songs are you listening to? Um, and we'll talk about if it's healthy, unhealthy, or abusive. And so automatically there, I noticed that young people start to flip a switch a little bit and start to recognize things. And that always comes with the, so am I not allowed to listen to this anymore, or am I not allowed to watch this thing? So that to me is them being mindful that they can recognize something's a bit off with this, or I can acknowledge like this is healthy or unhealthy or abusive. So that's one example. We also have a workshop called Don't Blame It on the Alcohol, which is probably where I've seen a lot of the impact happen. We have done it in different places, but also partnered with an organization called Safe Bar Network to talk about how like party culture and club culture can impact rape culture and how we look at like music and listen to music. So what we do is we use songs that have a combination of alcohol and sex involved, and we ask, do we think this song is drunk sex, or do you think that this is sexual violence? And the conversations are always interesting because everyone has their own interpretation. And I think that's the beautiful part about media literacy is that we interpret media based off of our identities. And so if the bias that a person has is that all hip hop music is bad, I might automatically assume that every rap song I hear is going to have some type of harm in there or promote some type of rape culture. And that's not always the case. So I also bring in, songs that are not in hip hop or, or rap culture. I bring in country songs. I bring in songs that, came out in the 20s. Like these are things that are universal. It's not just limited to one like genre of music. So that's one of my favorite workshops to do. It also led to us having a partnership with Brown Foreman, who is the alcohol company. So we did some work with them and we were able even to talk to some of their community members and their partners about it. And so that's another difference I'm seeing. So again, sometimes it clicks because folks are like, oh my goodness, I never heard these things before, or I never noticed this part in a song, or I'm looking at this song differently. And I believe that once we give folks tools, and you give me that media literacy tool of like, let's listen a bit closely to things that we're hearing, that's something that's transferable. It goes beyond just like like I mentioned before, this is a healthy relationship or this is an unhealthy relationship. And the last thing I want to say too about a noticeable difference, one thing I like doing with young people is social listening. So looking having them actually search things like relationship goals or whatever trending word is happening during that time, or even just browsing their social media to see if they notice any unhealthy or healthy things or posts that are there. And I say that's impactful and it can make a difference because then they start to notice things. Like I've had conversations with young people who noticed that their friends would post less frequently when they were in relationship with someone, or their posts started to look a little bit different, or maybe they were posting in ways that wasn't really like them. So it gives folks a way to even be active bystanders and to notice like when something isn't going right, but that also lines up with like how digital abuse works and how you can notice digital abuse happening. And so that's another way I've noticed a difference in what including media literacy can do with prevention education work.
And I think you and I would agree, in the terms of like for Safe Journeys, one of our mottos is education is prevention, specifically in terms of identifying unhealthy relationship dynamics and abuse. I think in the field that we work in, it's really important that you stay up to date, on all things like you said, technology is moving faster than we can catch up to it. How would you personally recommend someone interested in educating themselves on media literacy start learning? It's kind of overwhelming, so if you could say like, start here, where would your stepping off point be?
So my go-to often are two things. One of them is first look at the dominant narrative. Like, what is this message trying to say? And then also look at any counter narratives that exist. So, because sometimes media can give us one message, but there's also something underlying under there. So that's one way, but as far as like looking at relationship dynamics, I always lean to looking at healthy, unhealthy, or abusive. So even if you're watching, so because the first part, the real part is when we look at things like violence, about about 60 to 70% of media is violent. So we can notice those things there and notice how violence can impact the way that we are desensitized. Um, but also just looking at like your favorite TV shows. Like I am a big fan. I was looking at something recently. Love like the show Boy Meets World growing up. And it was the relationship between Corey and Topanga was like elevated. It was seen as like, oh, this is such a great couple. But recently I saw a video and someone said, let's go back and look at some of the power and control that was happening, looking at moments that were unhealthy, moments where like Topanga was not being her full and true self. She minimized who she was to make Corey happy. She didn't go to Yale because she didn't want him to feel bad. She, didn't hang out with certain friends. She was doing everything she could to impress him, and he was continuously trying to bring her down to his level. Now, on the outside looking in, because you have like laugh tracks there, you have woo and all those things happening, and they created the production creates it for us to lean towards it, looking at it as like this is a desirable thing. If we took all of that away and just look at the dynamics between them, we can see a lot of very unhealthy things. And so that's one way. And it's not to make people not enjoy like their favorite shows, but it just offers a different lens when looking at them. Because we've been taught to romanticize things and to apply media, especially things on TV and movies, or even social media, apply that to our lives when those things aren't always true. It's way, it's much better to recognize, okay, what would have made this healthy? What could this person have said instead? How could have Corey supported Topanga better, in these situations? How could he have recognized her brilliance and not try to bring her down? Like that would make it more healthy. So I think that's a simple way to start. It's something especially like parents can do or like adults can do with the young people in their lives because it allows like that bonding to happen with just sitting around and watching TV together, but it also gives a extra added layer of analyzing and looking at like what is real and what is okay and what is not okay at all.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference between viewing something critically and just watching it to watch it, right? So you can still enjoy, I think, media that portrays things that aren't good for you, right? Without, like I think you can enjoy the art while also acknowledging that the art is not perfect. And
Mhm.
I think that's where a lot of people get confused, at least, in my age group. It's kind of that cancellation of, well, you're portraying something negative. I have to then feel negatively about this entire aspect. What do you think? This is more of a personal question. Like, how do you ride that line of acknowledging things aren't great, but enjoying the art as a whole?
Yeah, and so for me, I first I just think about what I'm consuming. Like I notice even in my body, like how certain things make me feel. Um, there are some people I just won't listen to, and I just won't separate it, and
Yeah.
I'm okay to make
Yeah.
that choice. I'm not gonna shame anybody else, but people around me know how I feel about it. But I also, again, just remember to recognize what it is that I'm hearing and seeing. And I also have to on the other side remember just being an advocate that I also am okay. It's okay for me to have fun. It's okay for me to enjoy things, but just being mindful, of the things that I consume. And if I don't like it, just not being afraid to not like something. You know what I mean? Because I hear you, and there's a big like cancel culture I think that exists. And in some cases we have to like be real about it. Like some people have done harmful things, and they may have made things that are very entertaining and things that we enjoy, but it does send a message that because they create these things that we enjoy, that they're above reproach, you know what I mean? Or they aren't capable of doing something that's harmful. And I think that's a more important message of like, we can't make this person a hero because we like what they put out or we like the things that they've created. And in some ways, we have to be real with ourselves. And I also try to find alternatives, especially when it comes to like music. I think I'm really just mindful about the things I listen to, but I can't also say like there are some things I might listen to that folks are like, "What? I can't believe you listen to that." And it's like, yeah. And also like I can understand the and in both. I can value that. But where I think sometimes people lose me is when they don't look at the and in both too. And they just like hold this to a high standard when it's like, no, that's actually not okay. And that's when again, like this media literacy becomes fun. Like I was in a group recently and we were listening to, I think this might have been at the tech summit. We were listening to Nick Jonas,
Yes. Yes.
Jealous. Yeah. That also reminded me of like the Barbie movie and like Ken and Ken's character. Um I think things like that give room and space for just really good critical conversation. And again, it doesn't mean we can't enjoy these things. Like, it doesn't mean we can't like how like bop around to stuff, but it does give us a little added layer of like understanding and thinking about how this does also apply to real life.
Right. Like, I think there's a difference between watching a show that portrays an unhealthy relationship and hearing a real person maybe create art about their unhealthy relationship and their role in that. And I think there's a difference between the fiction and reality of it. You have to ride that line of, okay, this is fake and it's coming from a place of education as opposed to they're just telling me the terrible things they did
Right.
to a fun beat. And I need to be critical of that for
Mhm.
myself and for others. And I really appreciate that seems to be the base of your message is just to think, which I think seems more simple than it is in reality. So I appreciate the work you do to help people reach that.
Yeah, and most of the time it's fun. Like I mentioned, the don't blame it on alcohol activity. Like we actually start off by just playing music, playing popular club songs. And so usually it feels a little bit like a party at first. And then we start to like break down what these songs actually are saying. how does this look? Like one song we use is uh How Many Drinks by Miguel, and so that can open up a conversation about like if you are at a bar or a club and somebody buys you a drink, the expectations someone can have and how it's not okay to have expectations of things like sex if a person buys you a drink, or you don't owe anybody anything if they choose to buy you a drink. So we talk about have conversations like that are more cultural than anything. Like we're talking about shifting changes in culture and not just like individual incidents all the time. And I think media literacy allows us to create real, true, and relevant culture shifts.
And I think that's really important. And I'm excited to see what you guys do as we move forward and kind of as technology changes, how you adapt to that. I'm really excited to see. A lot of safe journeys in particular is built around the idea that healing's a journey. And I ask this question, I think, of everybody I interview. It definitely isn't linear either. What can you tell us about your journey that you're willing to share, of course, and how it's affected your life and the choices you've made that brought you here? I know you kind of talked about grad school and how you kind of like career pivoted from that. So kind of how did you get maybe not to the Zoom exactly, but here?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I actually started doing prevention work as a high school student, and it wasn't on purpose. I was an acting student, a theater kid, and I actually had gotten into some trouble at school. And my acting teacher, Brenda Perryman, she told me to take her class, and this class that she had, it was a traveling play about dating abuse and sexual abuse. And so I was joining because I was just interested in acting. And so I wasn't even acting at that time. I was holding props and boxes and helping to set things up. So from there, just kind of been something that stuck with me. But through my own experiences, just experiences of my loved one, I just became more and more invested. And also just understood like working with young people, really, not doing like domestic and sexual violence work, but just in general. And I just know that this is just such a part of all of our lives. And so that has been a part of it, but also just working. And so since then, I've worked like just in this movement, and had to find my own way. And that, sometimes came at a cost. People didn't always agree with things that I said or did. And, I had to stay the course. It's not easy having or starting a nonprofit. So that has been a lot, but it's a choice that I decided to do, and it's something I stuck with. And I came at a career change, like not even a change, just like a pivot and a change in employment during that time. So I had to make a choice then, and I'm grateful for it because it's opened up so many doors and it's allowed us to find like a niche and find like spaces we really want to be in. One of the things someone told me initially was like, you should just focus on being mainstream and just work with everybody. But deep down, I knew that I couldn't just do that because I knew that there were Black girls specifically who were facing adultification bias and may not have access to prevention programming. And so I wanted to make sure that Black girls, especially, were center in our center in all the work that we do. So even and I think with that I'm also creating this healing path and journey for my family, for my aunties and uncles and cousins and my mom and my sisters and myself. I am really breaking cycles of violence and harm that Black women have historically experienced by offering and making sure that Black girls are at the center of everything, even though everyone can benefit from it, right? Like, and everyone is invited, but the part of I always want folks to know is that Black girls will always be at the center. And if you are in space with Black girls, which most people are, making sure that they still have access to this type of information and they still feel supported and loved and cared for and not judged based off of stereotypes.
Thank you. I am constantly impressed by the work you do. So thank you very much for joining us today. Where can people find you if they're interested in learning more about what you do?
Yeah, so 11-24 spelled out ELEVEN -24.org is our website, so they can find us there. We're also on social media. So on we don't use X as much, but your Twitter. But on Instagram, it's underscore 1124. And also just for me, Tonjie at 11-24.org. And our Instagram is usually connected to our Facebook, which is the same thing. So usually if you kind of type in 11 spelled out 24, you'll usually be able to find us.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Best of luck with everything you've got going on. Make sure you follow us at safe.journeys and our podcast at safer.journeys.podcast. Or call us at 815-673-1555 if you're experiencing a violent situation and you need help. We are here for you. Until then, this was Tonjie Reese with 1124. I'm your host, Grace McCormick, and I hope you have a safe journey wherever you're going today. Bye-bye.